We have a stellar panel to help us with these considerations this afternoon. I'd like to begin by introducing our first speaker. Rosita Worl, PhD, is a Tlingit from Southeast Alaska. She received her doctorate in anthropology from Harvard and an honorary degree of science, Doctorate of Science from the University of Alaska, Anchorage. She is the president of the Sealaska Heritage Institute, which is dedicated to preserving and maintaining the Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian cultures and languages. Dr. Worl also serves as a board member for the Alaska Federation of Natives and the Sealaska Corporation, created by Congress to hold the Aboriginal land base of the Southeast Alaska Natives. In academia, she has worked as a social scientific researcher at the University of Alaska Arctic Environmental Information and Data Center, and was formerly an assistant professor of anthropology at the University of Alaska Southeast. In addition to these roles, she chairs the AFN Subsistence Committee and formerly served as chair of the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act National Review Committee. Please welcome Rosita Worl.
Dr. Penny. In accordance with our cultural protocols, I'd like to introduce myself, but first of all recognize Akhkani, Shuká Shah, Ms. Jackie Peda. Yedeklatsak kakahani yuchat duasak jakna ayachat, shangu kwedi nachatsati, kaudli yayi hit, just cat kwan ayachat, Shuká Khadi Dachkhank ayachat. My Tlingit's names are Yedeklatsak and Kahani. I'm an eagle from the Thunderbird clan and also from the House Lord from the Sun. I'm a just cat kwan, a chilkat, and I'm very proud to be a child of the Shuká Khadi clan. I'm used to giving about 3-hour lectures and can give up to 6-hour lectures. So I'm going to try to keep in the 10 minutes that I'm allowed, but forgive me if I go over just a little tiny bit. In this presentation, what I'd like to do is to review 3 events in which the Tlingit and Haida and the Tsimshians of Southeast Alaska participated in DNA studies. Our decisions to participate in these studies were based on our cultural values of Shuká and Latseen. Shuká refers to the bonds that unite current generations with our ancestors and also with our future generations. So here we're talking about relationships among ourselves, but also with our ancestors and also with our future generation. Latseen embodies strength of mind, spirit, and body. And in this, we were looking at migrations and ownership of our land. So from our cultural perspective, it was logical to participate in the DNA studies as a measure to look at relationships and also our migration patterns and the use and ownership of our land. However, I'd like to note that our cultural protocols also restrict any kind of studies, invasive studies of our shamans. The first event, case involved a person that I have identified as long ago person found. It was the remains of a young man that was who lived 600 years ago, and he was found in August of 1999 on the glacial ice fields between Alaska and Canada. When he was found, we immediately thought that it was Kakostani. And from our oral traditions, we know that Kakostani was left behind on the glacial ice fields when he had an accident and and the storm came up, and he knew that that the whole party would be endangered if they had to carry him back home. So he urged them to leave him, and they left him behind. So we thought immediately it was Kakostani. Since it was on Canadian soil, we had to meet with the Canadian Indians to discuss the disposition of the human remains and the artifacts that were found with him. We were interested in a study. There was some opposition to that from the interior Tlingit and other Indians, but we managed to forge a compromise in which we agreed that we would do a study of his human remains and also the artifacts. But after the studies were complete, then his human remains and the medicine bundle would be burnt, but the rest of the material would be kept for further studies. And I might note that we have studied those, and as a consequence, we actually were able to reintroduce a weaving technique that had been lost. We then decided that we would do DNA studies we had done the DNA studies of long ago person found, but then we decided that we would do DNA studies of the coastal and inland Tlingits to find out if there are any relatives. And we did this, and we actually found that we tested about 250 people, and we found that 9 people from Alaska and 8 people from Canada were related to long ago person found, and most of their relatives were from the Eagle Duxloedi clan. The second case involved the discovery of a 10,000-year-old human remain in 1996, and it really set the stage for a remarkable encounter between natives and scientists. And I will say that this event was overshadowed by the Kennewick Man discovery, which occurred in the same time period, but ours was a very different case in which we established immediately, consultations were held, and we had collaborative relationships that were quickly established. Some of our younger Tlingits were ambivalent about testing, and some were actually violently opposed, but our clan leaders and elders said no, that according to our cultural values, we were going to go ahead and grant permission to study the human remains and then conduct the DNA studies. The scientific studies were important, but that's another paper, and but when we decided that we would do the studies, we hadn't actually thought that we ourselves would participate in DNA studies. In 2003, Dr. David Glenn he was the director of the California Davis Molecular Anthropology Lab, offered to assess whether any of the 100 Tlingits who had participated in the long ago person found DNA study, he said we could study that and look to see if there were any descendants in the area from the 10,300-year-old Shuká, and that was the name that we gave that individual. I wrote to our Canadian brothers and sisters and asked if we could use that data, and they denied it, and saying that the consent form only related to that initial study, and if we wanted to use that, we were going to have to go back and ask each individual. Well, in August of 2006, Dr. Smith again offered to collect DNA samples from our people who attended Celebration. And Celebration is a biannual event in which several thousand Tlingit, Haidis, and Tsimshians attend. I reviewed the university's consent reform and decided that it needed to be amended to protect our interests. And I was interested in really specifying what the use of that DNA samples would be, and that would be to study the genetic relationships and the continuity of our indigenous populations in Alaska. I was also very specific in saying that they should not be used for commercial purposes. And thirdly, that the copyright of any genetic material derived from the samples would be retained by the biological owners and could not be patented. Dr. Smith advised that more than likely the university board would not have the time, could not approve of the revised consent form in time for a celebration. So, and of course I couldn't allow the study to go forward unless our interests were protected. Later in August 2008, I initiated efforts to proceed with the DNA collection in our 2008 celebration. And so we started to work quickly, and we came to an agreement on the consent form. We tested over 230 of our people, and we wanted to know if the DNA of Shuká was present in the contemporary populations. As it turned out, none of the participants possessed any of the DNA as that of Shuká, the 10,300-year-old Alaskan. However, we found that he did leave relatives who had migrated to coastal Native American populations in California, Mexico, Ecuador, Chile, and Argentina. Then in 2012, I was contacted by Dr. Schur from the University of Pennsylvania, and he wanted to conduct another study, and he was also interested in wanting to understand the migration paths and time periods of early humans entering the Americas. And our objective was, and I have to say that I was maybe self-serving in this, we had been doing a study of our populations, and I had a hypothesis that the Tlingit had actually emerged from two separate populations, and I wanted to be able to confirm that. 100 of our people participated in that study. We are yet awaiting the results of that study. And it does bring to mind, to the forefront, one of the things I was negligent in doing, and that was setting up a timetable for when the study should be completed, or at least our people should be advised of the results of the study. But based on earlier studies that he had done in our region, from those studies, he did find that the Tlingits are genetically different from the Haida, and that the Tlingits are genetically subdivided, and have distinct genetic affiliations with other Athabascans and other Northwest Coast population. And this was what of interest to us, in that he found that it was possible to distinguish members of the Tlingit eagle and raven moieties, and based on their MTDA DNA haplotype composition and composition of each social grouping. He found that the Tlingits have considerable diversity in the paternal haplotypes, implying their antiquity in the region. This does not necessarily confirm my hypothesis, but it does give a hint and brings us closer to my thesis that, in fact, we did arise from two separate populations. But we are awaiting the further findings from this study. So what have we learned from this, or what is our position? Southeast Alaska Natives, based on our cultural values, do support and participate in DNA studies in which our interests are protected, but we restrict any kind of studies involving shaman human remains based on our own traditional beliefs and assumptions. We also provide logistical and financial support to support the scientific investigations. And thirdly, we work to integrate traditional knowledge with scientific research and findings to increase our understanding of our own cultural history. Through these collaborative efforts, we are learning more about the colonization and settlement of Southeast Alaska, as well as our ancient history. One of our elders expressed that the scientific studies confirm that indeed indigenous people have occupied southeastern Alaska since time immemorial, or for at least 10,000 years. Did I? Oh, sorry. Thank you very much.